Hi, I'm Stephanie Rozzo. Welcome to Nature Sketch Creates Go Sketch, a Mexican Marigold instructional video. In this video, I'll be showing you how to paint the Mexican Marigold by applying what you learned with your step-by-step lesson. You can follow along with this video and do a sketch, even if you don't have the lesson kit. Help out this tiny business by clicking that like button, the subscribe button, and checking out naturesketchcrate.com to shop for future lesson crates. Head out to a park, garden, or even sketch at your home. Make sure you have all the materials you need before you go out to sketch. Remember, this is just a sketch. Take your time, relax, enjoy observing nature, and don't get too caught up with the details. Let's get started. So first, you'll want to figure out how you want this arranged on your page and what you want to include. And I picked this flower and bud because it's very similar to our final reference image. It might be easier to demonstrate. And like our final reference image, it has quite a few leaves, which you can easily get lost in. So feel free to pull some of those off if you need to make this a simpler image. And only include what you really want to include. And you can note on the side, if you really want to, that you trim some of those leaves off. Now, you could start by adding circles and ovals for each of these while leaving this aside. So you put like a oval for this part of the flower, and then another oval for the top part of the flower, and then a little circle for the bud and some lines for the stem. But you could also trace it, making it a little bit faster. So determine how you want that to look on your page. You can kind of move the plant around. And if you have the plant in front of you, you can just set the paper right behind the plant and trace it as well. It doesn't have to be detached from the plant. And like I said, we can trim some of these leaves off to make this simpler, or we could just leave them there. So that's up to you. I think I want to trim this whole part off here, making it a little bit easier. I think the rest are fine. You can figure out how you want that arranged, whether you want the leaf behind the stem or in front of the stem, or what have you. And then hold it down and just kind of do a rough light tracing on the outside. And this might be a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller than the plant, but it'll give you the placement and basic size. So you don't have to do as much guessing when you're drawing. Just makes it a little easier, kind of like tracing. So these leaves have a lot of little details with the leaflets. So you can pick little lines for the leaflets so you don't have to remember where they all belong. So just do a little line. And when you're sketching, it will turn out a little bit different. Even though it's a plant sitting in one spot, your head will move while you're sketching. So we'll make it so that it's not exactly like the plant itself. And over time you might be able to get the skill to draw it exactly that way, but this is just meant to be a relaxing practice. Try not to do anything too exact. As you can see, I'm just making marks for where all those little leaflets go, where the leaves are. Some places I'm just putting little points at the end so that I know where that leaflet is positioned. And even just getting a little bit of a circle around them, not even a full oval or circle, will give me an idea of where that belongs. The majority of those stems. I think that'll give me a good base to work off of for drawing this plant now. So I'll move it to the side, trying to keep it basically in the same position. So maybe like that. I'll go ahead and go through and draw it and see this crazy set of little marks. But they all give me a basic place to start drawing. And I'll probably start with the flower head For me, that makes the most sense. And I'm just going to use light marks to draw this in, really light. And to keep those lines straight, I'm just drawing lots of little lines. That helps give me a straighter line by drawing lots of little sketchy lines. And then later I can just draw over with a harder line, moving my hands slowly. I have that to guide me, those little sketchy lines to guide me. And then I'll start adding in this flower head, and this is just because it's what's comfortable to me. Maybe you'll want to start on those leaflets first. And just start in one spot to the next, and you can use your finger to guide you as well, so you don't get lost while you're drawing. And I'm just drawing simple shapes, taking one petal at a time, just basically putting it in there, not trying to be too exact. And like I said, it's going to be a little different because of my head moving and the plant is a little different position. I'm just getting some basic shapes put in real quick. So these are like little ovals on top of another oval, and if you build up from a base and then build up from there and build out, it's a little bit easier because you have something to base the size on and the positioning on. Just take those petals one at a time, adding them in. If you need to change the size, just make some slightly darker marks rather than erasing. Those sketchy marks are fun for sketches. It leaves a nice style. Again, not being exact at all, just getting this in, changing the size a little bit as I go based on what I'm seeing rather than erasing. I'm just adding some slightly darker marks. And it's not going to be exact, it's just approximate. It's just a sketch. So some of these petals are going to be a little smaller than they are on the actual flower head, but that's fine. Just adding some darker lines to indicate my final lines and making sure that this is the right size for what I want. Some of these need to be a little bit bigger. Just going through it again one more time. And if there are any lines that are going to confuse you, that's the time to erase. So this one's going to confuse me, make me think there's another petal there, but there isn't. So I'm going to erase it. So there are two petals, so one petal here, one petal here. But that petal is not there. The line was just as dark as these lines as my final line, so it's very confusing. So now I'm going to move down, and I'm going to use this as my base, so I'm just going to continue to work off of it to help me figure out, just like I did with working these petals up to the outside. So this is connected to this stem, so I'm going to take this leaflet and start there. And again, you can use your finger to help you figure out where you are working on the drawing from the plant. And I'm going to do some lighter sketchy marks first. And I know my little marks out here were on the outside of what the leaflet was, so do a quick little sketch there. And I'm trying to do this a little bit faster than you might want to as a demonstration so that I don't waste your time, but also to demonstrate how you can do this quickly, because when you're outside, things can happen. Maybe you don't have a lot of time, and it's easy to get interrupted or have to stop. So it's good to just practice being able to get this in real quick. I'm going to put this bud in first. And I'm starting with the base and then working my way up, just like I did with this. So I'm going to start in the center, using this as my base here, and then work out. So I see there's different parts of the bud, and I'm working out each one of those as an individual shape. And then I can modify that shape a little bit to better match that bud. And now that I have that, I feel more comfortable putting this next leaf in, the leaflet. And you can use a line for it, or you can use your marks to kind of create a circle, whatever you're more comfortable with. I kind of jump from one method to the other depending on what part of the drawing I'm doing. Quick little leaflets here. Not being worried about having it exact, just approximate size and location, positioning. It's gonna look like a marigold when it's done, and it's gonna be beautiful, and it's gonna be sketchy. So this is kind of a difficult leaf because it's in the front. I'm gonna do it first, and I have these lines to help me figure out the positioning. And placement to make this go a little faster. And see, this stem is seems a little off. But that's okay. I'm drawing some of these stem lines because I'm starting to get a little bit lost in positioning. So I want to make sure to add those in to help me out. I think what's confusing is this was a little bit more like this. And now it's fallen back that way a little bit more to the left in my perspective. So it's confusing me a little bit because this is further to the side. So just to help myself out, I'm going to go ahead and draw this leaf in that position. Or I could erase it and redraw it in that other position. That's a good time to erase because it's just getting too confusing. So I'm going to let it go back. It's okay to have some eraser lines and some marks underneath because this is just a sketch. Just studying this and relaxing outside. Getting to know this plant a little bit better, hopefully listening to nature. So it's okay to move your plant around a little bit. Your head did move anyway. So if you need to move the plant around to make the drawing make more sense, like I needed to see inside of here to make sure this all was in the right spot. So I moved my plants a little bit. That's just fine. If you get to this point and then that's enough and you don't want to do any more, you can stop here, leave these sketching marks. It's going to look great. And you can just go ahead and start painting in. You don't have to finish what you drew. And vice versa, if you see some things you want to add, maybe a dissection of the flower on the side here, you could do that. You can even add another flower bud from a different view or whatever you like. You can always change your mind, create something different, move it around. This is your sketch. You're welcome. To make it your own, it's very important. So you can just draw in the serried edges while you're working on it, or you can do it afterwards and add some of those little edges in after you have these little circular shapes. You don't want to spend too much time on details until you know you have the right size and placement for everything. So I like the way this looks. I'm going to add in the scientific name and the common name. I'm just going to write it right here on the top. And this is a hybrid, but I'm just going to write Mexican Marigold and keep it simple. So now that I have my drawing, I'm going to go ahead and move on to adding some paint. So I have my paints and I'll just revive them with a little bit of water so that I can use them again. And if they're not vibrant enough when I revive them, I always have my paints aside. I can also use these to remix the paints if I run out of any particular color. So I'm going to do this painting in the same order I painted the step-by-step so that you can see how you can apply your step-by-step lesson. And doing the sketch, the drawing, was a lot like transferring the image and then painting it. So I'll go ahead and revive my paint a little bit. This yellow, I picked up a little bit more of that full concentration color. Then I'm adding some water here, dabbing it off on my towel and testing it out. Looks like the right color. Could be a little bit lighter, but I think it'll work out well. And I'm just going to go ahead and add that over the entire plant, just like I did with the step-by-step. And the paint can be put on just like using a crayon or a marker, just filling in that space. And whenever the paint starts to run out of your brush, the paint pigment is not as vibrant as you want it to be or as dark, go ahead and pick up a little bit more, dab it off on your towel, and continue painting. And I just go from one side to the other and fill in the areas. And you can treat each space or shape as a separate area that you're painting. or you can fill it all in at one time. Whatever works best for you. After you get the yellow on there, go ahead and clean off your brush. We'll let this dry a little bit. It might still be a little wet, but I can test it by just dabbing my finger over it. Since we're not applying a whole lot of water, you can go ahead and get started right away. So this is already dry. So I'm going to take this yellow-green color, adding a little water to revive it. And this was my less concentrated, wetter in the palette color. I'm going to dab it off on my towel, check it out on my paper, and it looks a little too wet, so I'm going to pick up a little bit more of this, making sure not to add any more water. Dab it off on my towel and test it out. That looks better. Looks like the color concentration we're looking for. And when I say wetter and lighter, I mean the wetter in the palette, so there's been water added to it. And just gonna paint in this entire area. Actually, now it's a little too dark when I started applying it there. A little bit more water in my palette. That looks better. So I'm just going to apply it to all the green areas of my plant, just like we did with the step-by-step. And if you have too much water on your brush, just dab it off on your towel and then continue painting. Pick up a little bit more paint, dab it on your towel. And just go throughout and add it just like we did with the yellow color. If you need more concentration at any time, so we got, I think a lot of the paint just kind of fell into this part of my palette, it looks like. So I needed a little bit more. So I added some more of the full concentration color over, and I think that will work better, but if it's too dark, I can still change it. Just dab my brush off on my towel. There we go. Taking a little bit more of that paint pigment out of my brush. If you start applying too much, it's a little too dark, you can have a clean brush and just kind of move it around. So if I clean my brush off, this is still wet, so we're probably already dry. You can kind of move it. Dab it off my towel. It's fine if this is a little bit darker in some areas than the others. It doesn't need to be consistent throughout. And I want to create a little bit of a gradient because it's darker here and lighter here, so I'm going to dab off my towel and then bring that up in there. This is a little more yellow. So I cleaned my brush and then moved the darker paint up with a clean, wet brush. Not super wet, just damp, just clean, wet brush. So I didn't release any water while I was doing that. It was already wet to the touch, and then I moved it up, but you see there's not a lot of water coming off. Now that I've added that green color, I'm going to go ahead and add the next color. So I cleaned off my brush, and again, this is dry. I'm going to revive the orange color. Dab it off on my towel and then check it out to see if it's the right color. And I think for this, it is the right color. There's not a lot of yellow on the edges of this particular flower head. So I'm just gonna go ahead and add this color in. And I'm just gonna start on one side to the other. It's pretty consistent, the light isn't changing the coloration much. So unlike our step-by-step, I'm not going to worry about doing any kind of gradient. I'm just going to get one pretty consistent color. It's just a sketch, doesn't have to be super consistent. If you have some water you need to move around color, just feel free to move it a little bit. Dab it off your towel. Just kind of pick it up if you need to. Clean off your brush. And then this is dry, so we can add some darker green to it. So I'm going to add this Marigold deep green. Dab it off on my towel and test it out. That looks good. And I'm just going to add it. I'm going to look at my plant and look at and see, okay, where are these darker areas? And I'm going to start left to right so that I don't smudge it with my hand. And a lot of this flower is very dark. This particular cutting has very deep dark leaves, and it might be the lighting as well. So I'm going to add that in. Of course, not being too concerned with placement, trying to preserve some of that light yellow color underneath, but if I don't, it's totally fine. It doesn't need to be exact, just adding it in, just quickly, just getting it in there in the approximate general area, real quick. Having the extreme lights and darks will make it so that you don't have to add too many layers or work on this too long to make it look slightly realistic. If you need more of a tip, you can either roll it on your towel or roll it on your palette to get a little better tip. Don't forget to dab your brush off if you need to, and then roll. Clean off my brush, and then I'm going to create kind of a lighter color because I want to add that in here. So just a little bit darker, and then that's still wet. I'm going to let this have kind of a natural gradient by adding some paint here. It will just naturally start bleeding into those wet areas. And you have a lot less control over it. Sometimes that's fun too. And now that this is dry, I'm going to add the orange. And I did clean off my brush first. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of the dark orange. So the full concentrated pigmented orange. And I'm only changing the color in my palette. So making it wetter or lighter in my palette, not on my paper. And I'm going to test this out on my test paper. Looks good. And I'm going to add it to each petal one at a time. And starting in more the center and working out to the edges. So start wherever I see is the darker area and then working out towards the lighter area. And making sure to preserve some of this lighter orange color will give it contrast and dimension, making it pop off that page a little bit more. So I'm just looking at my flower and adding the darker color wherever I see it. And one thing that this bud has is some nice orange color through here. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of that, dab it off my towel, make sure it There we go. And I'm going to add it right in here. And I also might add a little bit more of this lighter color, green color, just kind of throughout here. Not too much, just kind of sparingly in some different areas. I feel like it's just a little bit darker than my reference flower was. So I like the way this looks, so I'm going to let this dry and move on to adding ink. So now I'm going to add some ink lines. This is still a little wet, but it's going to dry by the time I'm done adding some lines here. So I'm going to start with the 005 black micron. And basically I'm just going to redraw all the lines I drew initially for our initial sketch and add any lines that I might need that I didn't draw in at that time, any little details. And since this pen has such a small tip, it's great to start with just in case I make any mistakes that I don't want to keep. So I can redefine those mistake areas with the thicker pen. So it gives me a little bit of flexibility, and you can redefine some of these lines too depending on where the paint landed. So this shape of this leaf, I'm going to basically use the paint area to define where those final lines are going to be. And it's a stylistic choice to leave all these pencil marks behind. You can erase them if you want, but then you'll just end up with a lot of smudgy areas. So I recommend just leaving it. I think those pencil lines look great. So just go throughout and redraw the plant. I'm double checking that this is dry by just kind of dabbing my finger over, and it's dry, so I'll go ahead and add these petals. And when I'm redrawing this, they do have a little bit of a ruffled edge, so I'm going to add that in right now. Now that I've added all of the 005 micron lines, I'll move on to adding the 01 micron lines. So the 01 micron is just a little thicker, and it's helpful to just kind of bring some of these details out a little bit more. So I'll add them to kind of these forward-facing leaves and some of the petals as well. You don't want to add it to all of inconsistency with the line, so you don't want it to be all the same. That way it pops from your page a little bit more. Sometimes I just add them to wherever it looks like a harder edge or a little darker, but I try to do it sparingly throughout. Or maybe a space that needs to be defined from another. Something you might want to add to this drawing. The details are blown up close-up of the leaves because they have very interesting scent glands on the bottom. They're a little too small to see in this drawing. So lastly, I'm going to add in the thickest lines, the black 08 micron lines. It's a thicker tip. I'm going to start with the common name. And then I'm just going to add this in areas that I really want to have pop out or look deep to add a little bit more contrast. So here between some of these center flowers, petals here, these florets, I'm just going to add a few lines, and that kind of gives it kind of a deeper, darker kind of look. In that area there, and then just define this area here a little bit more. and any areas that I really want to have pop. And like before, it's kind of things that are a little bit more forward. You want it to pop away from things behind. And then you can see how some of these dark areas are popping out from the lighter lined areas, giving it some dimension. And one thing to note when you're working with this micron, make sure you let it dry before you move your hand over it. It will smudge before it dries. There's one last thing. You can add paint over the micron pens. They are waterproof, so you can add more paint if you need to. And I feel like this bud has a little bit more red and not so much orange. And I have my paints here, so I can add a little bit of red. So I'm going to put a little bit of red in here. And I think it's a little darker too. I'm going to probably put a little bit of green into it. Maybe even bring it over here. That looks like the right color to me. Like usually I'm going to dab it on my towel, test it out first. Looks good. I'm just going to add it right over that area. I think that's a little more accurate. If you didn't have the color with you, you could always just write a little note in there if that was something that was bothering you like it bothered me, but you can always add more ink to this or more paint if needed. Just try not to get too carried away. This is just a sketch. So I like the way this looks, so I'm going to stop there. Make sure to add any kind of observations that you want to add, or any additional drawings or paintings on the side that were observations of the plant, and include what you like. You could include how you were feeling that day, maybe notes about the structure of the plant that you couldn't include with the drawing, how the weather was, anything you like. This is your journal, this is your sketchbook. Great job observing your world, and keep practicing. Don't forget to click that like button, subscribe to this YouTube channel, check out naturesketchcrate.com for future lesson crates.